And hello and welcome to the program. I'm your host, Ron Whitlock, and we have an exciting program for you today because the mobile food truck craze is spreading across the entire United States and around the entire world, as a matter of fact. And we're here to discuss the possibility of that happening on Padre Island. And we're at Louis' backyard on South Padre Island, and we're welcoming to the program Arnie Crennan. Arnie of Gabriella is here on South Padre Island, and Dave Friedman. Dave, welcome to the conversation. Now, Dave Friedman has Laguna Bob's, Pyron's Landing, Sea Ranch, Pier 19, Marcello's, and we're going to let you, Dave, go first, because when you first heard about this and went to the South Padre Island City Council meeting where the potentiality of this was being discussed, and even maybe in the first reading for a legal aspects of whether or not this would or would not be done, and verified by statute by the City Council of South Padre Island, you were somewhat opposed, and now you're here on this program to indicate that maybe that's no longer the case. What was your opposition based on, Mr. Friedman?
My first thought was that this might be a possible cannibalization of some of our businesses who were established and here year-round and that type of thing. And I was concerned about possibly trash flying around, but after I've given it some thought, I think it's a real opportunity to really pick up South Padre Island and bring a new food program to town, so to speak. These people do a really good job with these. They're mobile. They have specialties. I think it could be real good for South Padre Island.
Could be under the right criteria.
Yes, I think they need to be regulated to, and they've talked about it here in the city council to some degree, to have paved lots, to have trash containers available, to make something available or an area for bathrooms to take care of that, and hopefully they'll be run by local people and business people here on to kind of keep the island for the island as opposed to the year-round business. We're here year-round. We pay taxes. We pay our people 12 months out of the year. And sometimes that's not real easy. So this, I think, could give us an extra boost for a little extra money, and I think it could be a little extra fun for the people that visit South Padre Island.
So when Victor Baldovino, the South Padre Island Township's Environmental Health Director, when he told the council in the presenting of the ordinance in particular, he said that they do affect permanent establishments. He did make that concession in the commentary that he brought up. However, he said that it does add a variety of culinary arts. And Dave, I know in particular, before we get into Arnie's comments in the conversation, you actually made a sortie out to the West Coast, up to Portland in particular.
Portland, Maine, yes.
Yeah, and you went out there and found out. What did you find out in Portland?
Well, they really do a great job out there because they really bring the specialties of the area. They define it to a single area that really does a good job, as opposed to maybe having 20 menu items. They have one menu item that's a specialty, and they specialize in it, and they get known for it, and it's the same product all the time. And they've really done a good job out there with bringing people into certain areas where they'll have 3 or 4 food trucks.
Now tell the audience, you explained to the council quite vividly, because you sampled in lobster roll or something like that they made, and you just made everybody's mouth water by talking about it.
One of their specialties, of course, is lobster, and they do a lobster roll, which is about a half a pound of lobster on a toasted buttered bun. And I mean, they're lined up for down the block, and it's sensational. And one of the reasons it's so good is because they make the same thing over and over, and it's fresh, and the food is, pervade, you know, on a daily basis. And so about as fast as the lobsters come in, they sell them. Very, very good, very impressive.
Now, for y'all watching the program here today, you need to understand that this is a conversation. This is something that may or may not happen on South Padre or even on Upper Padre, as far as that's concerned. But this is something that's being considered by the township, by the council of South Padre Island, Texas. Now, Arnie, you were there. You heard what Dave said. He said initially he thought there needed to be a limitation in these trucks. In fact, if they are permitted to begin operating on South Padre Island in particular, he's talked about 5 or some limiting number.
Right.
What do you think about this whole aspect of the potential of having this new phenomenon of mobile food trucks come to Padre Island?
Well, I think it would be wonderful, especially if you had perhaps, you know, whether it's 5 or 8 or 10 licenses granted and everybody worked together. I think that there's certain criteria that people are now talking about having it be, whether it's they have an established restaurant already with certain criteria to that, whether it's, you know, having a grease trap and on and on and on, and that in most cases, hopefully there would be like an association of things. There's areas in the United States that does this, like in Seaside, Florida, which is not far from Destin. They do that, and they actually have people that have Airstream type trailers that it's beautiful, and they specialize in different things. It's not competitive with each other, and people can go there and make a choice of what they're going to get. In most cases, and Dave and I talked earlier, in most cases, each truck would have an individualized type specialty. And the hope is that you're really not digging into somebody going, like, he has restaurants, I have a restaurant. We're not looking to take the people and pluck them out of there. We're looking for the people that would, instead of going and, you know, grabbing a fast food burger or something like that, or a fast food hot dog, or whatever the case may be, it's going to be something new and exciting for them. That's what I think our hope is.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree?
Yes.
And that's really what it is. It's opening up a new segment of business that has a lot of potential.
One of the council persons in particular indicated that what she had envisioned was adding to a festival type of an approach during the peak seasons. And I guess during the peak seasons, if your restaurants, your established restaurants are full and no room anyway, because it's so full because it's spring break or it's July 4th or it's Labor Day, those kinds of things, then it's really not affecting you that adversely if it does in fact create a magnet for people who want to come because they like the overall festival type of atmosphere. Is that what you kind of envision now yourself,
you
Dave?
come off the beach and you may not want to, or go into a restaurant with you're not dressed maybe 100%, but you're down here, you're having fun on the beach, you're having fun in the sun, you're looking to either go home or go back to the beach, and this that's what we're about down here. We're about sun and fun and beach and hopefully food, and I think this is just another plus on that side.
And the aspect of partnering with an existing establishment, establishing restaurant, having some kind of a relationship, either a lease or partnerships or circumstance within this criteria.
Yeah, I think that establishes the idea of sanitation, of trash pickup. In other words, we live here, we make our living here, you know, so I think we're going to be very responsible to make sure that those things are all in line.
We'll be back in a moment with more conversation here at Louis' Backyard, South Padre Island, who's hosting this conversation. We're going to be talking about should the mobile food van or mobile food truck phenomenon come to South Padre Island? Would it be an advantage? Would it provide a diversity of additional kind of culinary arts in particular? What are the pluses? What are the minuses? We're here to have that conversation, and we'll continue that when we come back. So stay tuned. And right, welcome back to the program. We're being hosted by Lou's Backyard, South Padre Island. A conversation about should mobile food trucks be allowed on Padre Boulevard and on Padre in particular. South Padre is where we're doing this program. So in this particular case, we're talking about South Padre. We're going to be visiting Upper Padre at some point and see what they're going to be doing on that end of the island. We have with us now Herschel Patel. Herschel, thank you for joining us on the program. Herschel in particular has Garden Grill, Copacabana, and the Beach Club Bar and Grill here on South Padre Island. And Michael Lafferty. Michael, thank you for joining us here in Lou's Backyard on our program. And Mr. Lafferty and his wife had Padre Rita Grill, South Padre Island. Mr. Lafferty, you spoke in opposition at the time that the ordinance was brought up for voting by the Council of South Padre Island. And after hearing some of what was discussed in the previous segment with Dave and Arnie, you still as avidly opposed, or based on how it's structured, you may or may not be in favor of this ordinance as it goes forward?
I'm still kind of on the fence about it, and let me clarify. I'm not opposed to food trucks. I think food trucks are a magnificent and marvelous draw. My wife and I travel frequently. We spend a lot of time eating at food trucks. They are a culinary masterpiece, and I love them. My concern has more to do with the simple economics of the situation. The food truck industry that I've seen all come from cities, large cities with 100, 200,000 plus people. South Padre Island does not have that demographic to draw from. So my concern is the simple dispersion, the supply and demand. At what point are we going to have more supply than we have demand? Simple economics tells us that you can diffuse a situation where the pie does indeed get larger for the consumer but smaller for the producer, and that's my whole concern here. Is that we have the island is a unique microcosm. Is that we have very, very large restaurants that are corporate owned, and then we have family owned restaurants that have been fortunate enough to have multiple units. And then we have several very small restaurants who are mom and pop operations. I'm concerned about the wellness of the mom and pop operations. I'm concerned about the single unit places, and that's my whole concern. I think if we can come to some agreement as to how the food trucks can come in, be economically feasible, but if they can increase the consumerism and increase the business, I think it's a great thing. We're all for trade here on the island. We have to bring in the trade base. But if all they're going to do is dilute and make a smaller portion of the pie available for everybody, I don't think that's necessarily a good thing for the business community of South Padre Island, Texas.
So on one hand, you believe that they are a great phenomenon and attraction, but yet as long as this ordinance and going forward, if in fact it is ever sees the light of day and it comes to fruition here on South Padre Island, that it needs to be really monitored in such a way that it does not affect local business.
That's correct. That's my feeling.
So maybe the conversation that was held earlier in the previous break about having a partner that is in the restaurant business may be the way to go.
That may be the way to go. That's could be a viable option. And like I say, the mayor has said that he's going to form a task force committee to take a look at this, and I'm really anxious to see, to listen to those hearings and find out what happens. And I think we can scope a good situation here on the island, but I think it's going to take a lot more work and a lot more effort than just simply passing an ordinance, opening the gates, and say, there you go, have at it.
Anything to share, Mr. Patel, with what Michael just told me and the audience?
No, just to add to it, actually, the ordinance, in order to prevent the island from becoming overrun, perhaps with food trucks, it's a simple policy decision on the part of the permits department to issue a limited number of those permits. Secondly, if, like the previous people who were up here mentioned, if the city is involving the restaurant community in the issuing of permits, then the control is essentially in the hands of the restaurant industry on the island. So if you're having to co-apply for a permit with a brick and mortar restaurant, then you are then you're essentially sharing the liability with that brick and mortar restaurant. And they're inclined to oversee the operation a little more closely, and it's controlled by that industry. So I could see it going that way. That's incorporated in McAllen's food truck ordinance. It's in Austin, so I can't see why it wouldn't work here. But there is, I think, a hunger for that type of thing, and it can be demonstrated by all the other cities in the valley who are hopping on to this sort of this train, if you will. But now the county's about to jump on this, and the danger for the island is that a lot of those tax dollars are going to be siphoned right out of town, right out of the city limits, because they'll be eating up there, all the people who are going north. And sometimes there are times a year when there are more people up north than there are within the city limits, because that's a great that's a greater area in that going north. And we see that in the afternoons when the traffic backs up, and
Absolutely.
we know that a lot of those dollars are going right out of the city. So this is a good way to kind of capture that audience. And there's been a lot of thought behind it. I think the first time it was presented, I think people weren't reminded about some of the aspects of the current ordinance as it stands, the draft ordinance, if you will, that cover a lot of the concerns that were raised. So I think a good reading of that would have been beneficial. But I'm hoping it passes and they incorporate some things to put some control in the hands of restaurateurs currently functioning on the island. But yeah, overall, I'm in favor of it.
Last minute thoughts by our two guests, Herschel Patel and Michael Lafferty, when we continue, so stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to the conversation. We're meeting, greeting, and having this conversation for you at Louis' Backyard, South Padre Island. Herschel Patel, who is the proprietor of the Garden Grill, Copacabana, and Beach Club Bar and Grill here in South Padre Island, and Michael Lafferty of the Padre Rita Grill, also South Padre Island. In the previous segment, Michael, you heard what Herschel said about he really thinks, he hopes this thing goes through. What's your reaction to what he said in the last segment?
I hope it goes through if it employs local people, brings local dollars into South Padre Island community, brings local tax base into our community. If these people are going to come in as the old robber barons did, come in, scrape the cream off the top, not hire our people, not support our business community, I don't think we need them here.
That's my feeling on it.
I never thought about what you said, Herschel, about the aspect of out on the county's beach, which is outside the city limits of SPI. All the corn people and those kind of people that are out there not as regulated as what you're anticipating having within the city limit of South Padre Island. So you are looking at a competitive circumstance with those people on the county side, on the beach side, down the road.
Right. I mean, once they begin to permit actual food trucks, and actually there are a couple that it's not just corn and those things. I mean, they do have people who serve burgers and other concession type foods. The parks have concessionaires who function out of the the concession stands there who sell a lot of that food. So they do very well up there. One of the Garden Grill is an approved concessionaire for the county. We've never actually exercised that yet, but we may if things don't happen on this side of the city limits. But I don't foresee a situation where there'll be people, so to speak, skimming the cream of the peak hours here. The people who prefer to eat in a sit-down restaurant, I don't think are gonna opt to go and eat at a food truck. I mean, that's just the. I know when I'm out and I want to go for a nice dinner with my family, I want to sit down and eat, I'm going to go to a sit-down restaurant. I'm not going to go to a food truck. On the other hand, I see a lot of people who are out on the beaches who prefer to have food that they could just kind of carry with them, and I think that's a demographic that might enjoy eating off a food truck. And there are some restaurants here who have sort of expressed interest in going that way as well. Is opening a food truck during the day if their restaurants open in the afternoons, or even some have even suggested that they would go completely in that direction if they felt they could make more money. So it's I think it's an interesting new area. It needs to be introduced very carefully, but at the same time we can follow the example of other cities who have implemented this and it be done responsibly.
Mr. Lafferty, you said you and your wife have gone and you've actually participated in being a consumer in some food trucks in your travels around the nation. Tell us some of your experiences that you could share with the audience.
We spend a lot of time on the road. We've been to food truck malls just recently in New York City, both up in Brooklyn and down on the Lower East Side. We've been to food trucks in food courts in Austin. We've been to food courts in Washington, D.C., Seattle, San Francisco, Denver. And where I'm finding those is there is a large group of food trucks. There'll be 5 or 6, 7 together at one point in time. I've never seen a situation, I take that back. I have seen situations where you have individual food trucks sitting haphazardly. I don't necessarily frequent those. I frequent the food truck malls, so to speak, and that's kind of what I'm concerned about here. Mr. Patel, with all due respect, he says, we don't foresee this and we don't anticipate this. My concern is, okay, what's going to happen when things happen that we don't anticipate and don't foresee? If you drive down Padre Boulevard now, you have a lot of empty buildings. You have a lot of restaurant buildings that used to be restaurants that are no longer restaurants.
Scampi's in particular.
Scampi's in particular, the dog shop, Jackie's. Jackie Paddock has been an island resident here for years, finally had to just give up and go. Okay, so let's take a restaurant, let's close it down and put a food truck out in front of it. Wonderful.
What kinds of consumer items would you want to explain to the audience that they may can see? What do we think assume this was going to be done on a temporary trial basis with a capability of it being revisited after each season by the council and try it out for a year? You've got to refile, and that's one of the discussion points that I'm hearing around the community. And just because you get a permit in 1 year doesn't mean you're going to have to reapply for the next year. And whether or not it's limited in number or increased in number, that'd be determined by the council on an annual going on basis. That would be one way to start. That make any sense or not?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Along that point of, and I know we're running short on time, but along that point of bringing diversity in, okay, so you're going to invite a chef in, a great chef who has a great product and a great idea and a great concept, which is what we're looking for, some sort of culinary delight. But then the council's going to say, no, you can't do that because that's too similar to what he's doing or too similar to what that's doing. The whole point of food truck is the diversity. So on one hand, you're saying, let's bring it in. And then on the other hand, you're saying, let's let the council oversee that.
Last 30 seconds, Herschel.
I wanted an opportunity to address the part about the restaurant turnover with the buildings along the boulevard and on the island. And one thing I would like to say is a lot of those businesses didn't survive because they couldn't afford the overhead of a brick and mortar. They had a passion for food. We know Jackie did. But if you cannot afford the overhead of a restaurant, especially in the off season when things are really tough here, then it makes it very difficult for people to stay afloat. And that's why we have that high turnover. Food trucks are sort of a remedy to that because there is a much lower overhead with food trucks. There's a smaller inventory. The cost of a food truck over a brick and mortar, over a building is far less. Even if you're leasing, you can finance a food truck, for instance, and for a lot less than you can lease a restaurant. So that is a solution to this business turnover on the island, to where people can come that have a passion for the food and establish themselves, and then perhaps even graduate to a brick and mortar restaurant from there, instead of trying to take a nosedive for it and fail.
Herschel Patel, Michael Lafferty, thank you for appearing on our program. Thank you for watching. To give us feedback, go to feedback@ronwhitlock.com. That's feedback@ronwhitlock.com, and give us your opinion, your attitude as part of this conversation. We want to hear from you so we can engage you in this particular new aspect of business that may or may not come to Padre Island and South Padre in particular. Till next time, adios.